Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Before we start, I have a couple of quick announcements that Sphinx asked me to make, so bear with me if you would. For SphinxConnect Fellows, please check your email for an important announcement from Sphinx. That's very important. Has to do with some events today. Also, please join us for the Honors Concert, which is today at noon. Buses will run from 11 to 11:30 today, so please jump on board. I am going to be utilizing this nice little iPad here to use Slido, which you probably saw in use yesterday as well. But be thinking about questions that you might have for me or for these wonderful panel of young musicians. Anything that comes to mind, and if you type in a question, your fellow audience members can vote on or like a particular question, and the more likes that particular question gets, the more it goes to the top, and we'll take those questions. So before we do that, I thought we could start with some introductions. My name is Michael Shinn. I'm the Dean of Music at Boston Conservatory at Berklee, where I've been for about a year and a half. One of the things that initially attracted me to Boston Conservatory at Berklee is its phenomenal dedication to diversity and inclusion. Berklee is, in many ways, largely because of the repertoire on which its history is based, is very, very diverse as an institution. And those two schools merged in the summer of 2016, which I think, from my perspective, provided an opportunity for Boston Conservatory to really dive headfirst into this priority, which, from a strategic perspective, it is among our highest priorities. So I'm thrilled to be there. I'm also a pianist. I am a husband and a father of two young, adorable children. I think of myself something as an arts entrepreneur as well. We were just discussing earlier a music festival that my wife and I started called Piano Sonoma Music Festival out in Sonoma County, California, that brings together, it's a chamber music festival that brings together diverse musicians, people who are young superstars on the cusp of international careers, and adult musicians of all backgrounds. So I'm thrilled to be here today with these wonderful musicians, one of whom I've known for many years, Patrice. And I'll turn to them to share a little bit about their stories and what brought them to be here at the SphinxConnect conference. And just so you know, the title of this little talk is Nurturing the Seed. And of course, this conference is all about artistic leadership. We're going to be focusing in particular, and you can think about this for your questions, we'll be focusing in particular about how we can encourage young musicians, junior high school level students who are passionate about their art forms to really embrace in a full-bodied way their careers in music and go into it in their college studies. So first, I'll pass the torch off to the gentleman sitting to my left. This is Teddy Abrams, who's the music director of the Louisville Symphony Orchestra. Teddy, tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, and if there are any strong artistic influencers you might have had in your life. I'd be curious to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, it's great to be here at Sphinx. So excited about this conversation, and I'm music director of the Louisville Orchestra, and my kind of origin story, I think we all have something of an origin story in our kind of micro superhero ways, was that I was brought to a free outdoor concert played by the San Francisco Symphony where I saw my very first performance by an orchestra. I was playing clarinet and piano and took it very seriously. I don't know quite why, I can't explain exactly how it happened, but for whatever reason I picked up the clarinet and within a couple of weeks was playing through the book. I still don't have quite an answer to how that happened, but I do know that I didn't come from a family background where music or going to musical performances was a regular part of our experience. And I think my parents thought, well, we should probably go and actually take Teddy to see what a professional musical experience would be. And that meant an outdoor free concert that the San Francisco Symphony played, all Gershwin. I had absolutely no context for what an orchestra performance was, so for all I knew, that was how normal orchestra concerts looked. And I went to the performance, and Michael Tilson Thomas was conducting. And within about maybe 20 seconds of the performance, I decided I was going to be a conductor. And I was 9 at the time, and I wrote a very long letter to Tilson Thomas, page after page after page, about how I was going to be a conductor, and talked a lot about Mozart and Beethoven and how they were, you know, probably my closest friends at that point. I was an unusual child. Anyway, I asked for a conducting lesson. And yeah, I didn't know what you were supposed to do when you write to somebody like that, so I just put it all out there. And in fact, I got a note back from Tilson Thomas that I have still on my wall to this very day that gave me some of the best advice a young musician could have as just a musical explorer, but even as a person who wanted to become a conductor, the advice about listening to all the people that are playing in an orchestra when you're in youth orchestra or band or anything like that. He gave me advice about other composers to explore, many of whom are still my favorites to this day. And that little little connection right there between two people in such a different place in life and in the world was all that I needed to kind of launch absolutely everything that I've done since then. I can attribute it to that moment of getting that letter back, that tiny little affirmation that what I wanted to do was actually a possibility. So I don't know if that's, I don't know how long the introductions are supposed to be, but that's...
You're fine.
Okay, well, that was kind of the seed, I guess, if we're talking about nurturing the seed that launched everything else. I eventually started working with him. He intervened very fortuitously in a complex series of music teacher swaps and things like that ended up happening around the time I was 12. And so I was very fortunate to have him as my actual mentor, more than a correspondence, but actually working with him. And then he started bringing me out to the New World Symphony. I think the first time I conducted there I was 14, which was a little unusual also. But he believed in me.
Kid.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the look on the orchestra's face the first time I walked out, I think they thought, well, that's just how things go. If you have ever been down there in Miami, I know John Keyser certainly has right there. He knows that that's par for the course. But that, again, was another indication that somebody, if they really believe in you, can give you opportunities that make everything else fall into place and give you the confidence and the possibility of building something that you really believe yourself. So that's the origin story.
That's a great story. Thank you. I'm sensing a lot of boldness and courage in your story as well. As a 9-year-old, that really took some courage to write a letter to somebody like MTT.
Yeah.
So kudos to you for that. And on the other end of it, it's a helpful reminder to all of us that you know, from our whatever perches we sit on, you know, music director of an orchestra, whatever communication that we can have with those young musicians is really, really crucial.
Well,
even if it's just a short little note saying, you can do it, this is good, let's try.
And to this day, I have a policy. I respond to absolutely everyone. Mm-hmm. And anytime, I don't care how crazy or unusual the note is, if a kid writes and says, can I come, you know, bring my score to X, Y, and Z and get, you know, a couple hours every time, you just write back and you forge a connection because you don't know where that's going to lead for them. And that's why I have that letter hanging up on my wall, because it's just a reminder that we can make that kind of impact on a daily basis.
And what a better introduction than a concert of Gershwin. So thank you, Teddy. Let's turn to Patrice Jackson here, who I've known for a while. You were in a class, was I a teaching fellow at the time? Back at Juilliard, yeah, in our student days.
Yes.
And then fast forward to our time in Boston now. Patrice is on the faculty at, well, you are on the faculty at Berklee College of Music, and we just brought you over to the conservatory as well, which I'm particularly thrilled about.
So am I.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Patrice Jackson. I reside in Boston. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. My story is quite different than my friend here. I'm the sixth generation in my family to play a stringed instrument. And that goes way, way, way back to as far back as we can do, is the late 1800s. If anybody knows the history of our country, you can imagine what my ancestors were doing as musicians. They were the entertainers, right? in Mississippi. So I grew up understanding the history of my ancestors and getting to know a little bit my great-grandfather, who was a blues guitarist before he passed away. My dad is a bass player, and growing up, he was an orchestra director in St. Louis, just recently retired. But there was this drive in me from an early age that I just knew I wanted to play an instrument. I started originally on piano at 2.5 with my mom, and then at 8, I was watching Sesame Street and saw Yo-Yo Ma, and I was like, I want to do that. But I had a lot of people around me who said, you can do whatever you want, including my parents. But there was a lot of outside people who were like, you can't do that. Nope, that ain't cool, that's different, whatever. But because my parents encouraged me so much and just kept saying, forget that, you can do whatever you want to do, at 12, my life changed. I won a concerto competition. I was the youngest to ever win that particular competition locally. And for whatever reason, the conductor did not want to conduct my concert. So my dad got wind of it. I'm not sure how he got the phone call, but they asked him if he would just conduct my concerto. So I got my first stage experience playing a solo concert with my dad right next to me. That changed my life forever. I asked my father right after the concert, and I specifically said, who's black doing this? And my dad said, no one. I was like, well, I want to be the black version of Yo-Yo Ma. He was like, okay, let's go. So my parents buckled down, scraped pennies to make sure I had the best teachers locally. When I was 16 years old, I had the opportunity to play for Mr. Yana Stalker, and he thoroughly enjoyed my playing enough to give me free lessons on a monthly basis during my last 2 years of high school. So my dad drove me 4.5 hours each way to Indiana so I could have lessons with him. My senior year, I met Mr. Aldo Pariso, and at the time he was teaching at both Yale and Juilliard. When I met him, I had the high hopes of going to Juilliard. That was my dream school. And he encouraged me to come to Yale first. So the plan was to have him for 7 years. So 3 years at Yale, 4 years at Juilliard. While I was at Yale, I introduced him to this amazing company and competition called the Sphinx competition. And Mr. Pariso basically was the continuation of Mr. Starker. They both really encouraged my playing and made sure that I was the best cellist, period. They didn't matter what the package looked like. They just wanted to make sure that I had the training and I had the technique down and I had all of the other aspects of being a soloist necessary. Mr. Pariso took it a step further and encouraged all this stuff that happened while I was in college, including cutting my hair and going natural. And then my head got cold, so I started putting materials on. That turned into my head wrap signature, if you guys don't know. And all of my Afrocentric attire, he totally encouraged that, which led to coming here to the Sphinx competition and wearing my African attire. Then Mr. Pariso kind of paved a way for me at Yale, because when I won here, I was doing the majority of my concerts my last year at Yale. I'm trying to graduate. I'm backstage of these orchestras in dressing rooms studying because I have tests waiting for me when I land. So it's just everything just kind of fell into place. And then when I came to Juilliard, unfortunately, Mr. Pariso resigned 2 days before my Juilliard audition. So I had the amazing opportunity to continue my studies at Juilliard with Mr. Joel Krosnick. And that was another added nurturing seed for me. Mr. Krosnick was amazing. He also was very concerned about making sure I was the best artist, period. It didn't matter if I wanted to be a soloist. It didn't matter if I wanted to play in a chamber group. It didn't matter if I wanted to teach, just making sure that the artistry is at its best. And I can honestly say it is and it was. So those people, including my parents, basically were my nurturers, if you will.
What great, absolutely inspired musicians you all inspired you to step up to the plate, Yo-Yo Ma and MTT. Incredible. But I think one of the binding elements between the two, and this is to all of you parents, myself included, is dedicated parents. I mean, Teddy, you said your parents brought you to that concert. And Patrice, for your parents to drive you 4 hours each way to those lessons with Yana Starker, that's incredible. So kudos to the parents there as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks. I just had the pleasure of meeting Maria Romero Ramos as well, who's teaching currently at Vanderbilt's Blair School of Music. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to pursue your life in the arts.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today, this early morning. It's my beginnings in music started actually with exposure to Venezuelan traditional music. And I have my family, my mom in particular, to thank for that. In Venezuela, it's very common to be very much in touch with our folk music and to have traditional folk instruments laying around. So we had a cuatro in my home, which is a Venezuelan 4-string guitar, and we had maracas growing up. And so music, traditional music, was a big part of our family, especially during the holidays. We would improvise. And I remember that my very first really meaningful collaboration in music was when I participated in a voice competition in my elementary school. And I am not a singer. But back then, I remember that the musicians that I collaborated with, teachers and folk music artists from my town, they told my parents, she's got rhythm, so she should perhaps study music. And my mom really took that to heart. And she took me years later, she took me to the conservatory in my city, in Valencia, Venezuela. At the time, I was 12 when I wanted to start playing an instrument. Actually, when I went, I was 11. And they told me that I was too old to start playing the violin. And the violin was what I wanted to play. I don't know why, but I was determined. They told me I was too old, and I was assigned the harp. And the harp is a beautiful instrument, and I played it for 3 months, but it was too heavy, and I still wanted to play the violin. And so my mom took me to take private lessons from a teacher that she had heard was very good with kids. And so I took private lessons for a year, and we went back to the conservatory. This is an El Sistema program in Valencia. And I re-auditioned at age 12, and I had caught up to my age, and they accepted me. So I was part of El Sistema for 4 years before I came to the United States. So I think back home, just having the support of my parents and people, and my first violin teacher who really believed in me, even though I was told by others that I was too old to start in classical music, that really meant a lot. And I think of that as a teacher even to this day. And then when I came to the United States, I had a succession of really life-changing events, the support from so many people who believed in me, and just coming to the Sphinx organization, to the competition, it was just so eye-opening to see what was out there, and I had no idea what was out here. And so it was just a combination of exposure, opportunities, and people who believed in me. And each mentor, when I think back, each of my teachers had something so important to give me, to pass down to me, and they really gave me what I needed to form my own identity as a teacher, as an artist. Nowadays, my violin teacher at North Texas, where I did my undergraduate, she really gave me all the technical foundation and support that I needed, and artistry. That's where I started playing Baroque violin as well. The orchestra director of the Baroque Orchestra at UNT, he just would walk around the hallways at UNT and ask people, do you want to play in the Baroque Orchestra? Come audition. So he did that. And I'm so grateful. He's still a mentor to me to this day. And historical performance practice has been a big part of my life until today. And my teachers at IU, where I did my master's and I'm doing my doctorate at the moment, they have been so influential as well. To complement my artistry, my knowledge of historical performance practice, and most importantly, my knowledge of pedagogy, how to teach. That's the one thing that I always knew that I wanted to do, my vocation as a teacher. I really wanted to be a teacher, and I I knew that I didn't have the tools necessary to be an impactful teacher. And at IU, I really acquired those tools. And since then, I've been doing a lot of teaching in different situations in social music programs, El Sistema-inspired programs, being affiliated with organizations that serve this purpose. And I've been very lucky in that regard, that I've had people that have helped me nurture my seed in many different areas. And nowadays, I'm teaching at Blair, and I'm doing all of those things. I'm teaching modern violin, Baroque violin, I'm teaching collegiate level, pre-college. So I'm very happy with who I am today.
That's great, and it sounds like all of us have really wonderful stories of great professors who have inspired us as well. You have a plethora of experience teaching, it sounds like, and you're doing so many different types of teaching. How can you harness that inspiration that you had as a youngster into your own teaching and support your pre-college students especially? I'm curious.
I think that who we are as a teacher is the combination of all the influences that we've had in our story, in our lives. And then, of course, from there, we form our own ideas about teaching, our own philosophy. But I think it's really important to me as a teacher, with my pre-college students, to really make sure that my teaching is informed by all of my experiences in all my areas. So socially speaking, really discuss issues that they might not be aware of. Also learn about their background, where they come from, and coming into the lessons with no preconceptions, just get to know them and get to know their interests, their culture, where they come from. And then musically speaking, really each piece of music make them critical thinkers about their piece that they're performing. Definitely not focus on learning the notes only, which is important as part of the process, but having them have awareness of who the composer was, what time period they lived in, what the historical circumstances were at that time, and how can we bring this language to life the most that we can with the tools that we have. So even though I don't teach my pre-college students on a Baroque bow or with gut strings, I try to bring that awareness of historically inspired performance if they're playing Baroque repertoire, which is the repertoire that a lot of pre-college students play. So I do think that aesthetics can be brought into the lessons from a really early age, and that understanding and awareness of differences of periods and styles.
Yeah, performance practice style has always informed my own playing and my own teaching in a big way as well, so kudos. Just a quick plug here to the audience. I only have 2 questions on Slido yet, but we'll get to them in just a moment. If you're not so inclined to use the tech, we will open it up for questions from the audience physically. In person, we have a couple of microphones there, so do be thinking about that. Excuse me. Teddy, let me turn to you for just a second. We spoke earlier about how important programming can be in audience development, and you have talked a lot about how the diversity of your programming you feel has helped to attract new audiences in Louisville. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, one of my things that I focus on is we've created kind of a mantra for ourselves saying that we will be the most interesting orchestra in the world. And that sounds super pompous and arrogant, but this is something that I learned from, I wrote a piece about Muhammad Ali, and I spent 2 years researching Muhammad Ali, who arguably was one of the greatest kind of self-proponents in the history of the species. So every time Muhammad Ali went around and said, "I'm the greatest," I thought about this. I tried to put it in the context of what he was actually saying, and what he really meant, and what perhaps the application might be in a contemporary setting for somebody trying to do something, whatever that might be. And I realized that his whole idea of saying, "I'm the greatest," was not just to describe himself, it was an aspirational mantra. And that by telling yourself what you really want to see, you could actually use the word to create the reality. Oh, that even rhymed. That was very Ali-esque. Anyway, what I've tried to do is to say, if we're going to be the most interesting orchestra in the world, and this is not a competition, by the way, I'd make that really clear. This is not actually a competition. It's just to be an orchestra that our community demands we be. That means that you kind of have to take the entire system apart and make no assumptions whatsoever. Any assumptions about repertoire, format, the way music is presented, the relationship to the audience, throw those out the window. You can get them back anytime, but those assumptions, they're not helpful in building a relationship to your community. You have to look at the community as it truly is, and you have to ask hard questions every single day. You have to be unafraid to look at the existential questions of why we even exist as an orchestral institution, a very complex, challenging dynamic where fundraising and finance does not always meet artistic and community expectations. So you have to look at these questions in a really hard way. Fortunately, it's fortunately and unfortunately, when I got to the Louisville Orchestra, they had just gone through a very rough period, a strike, a bankruptcy, and it meant that we were able to dream and think in any way we wanted, because the responsibility was simply to create something that worked. Nobody said, do this, do that, because that's how we've always done it. What they always did simply didn't work. And I think, taking a look at the big pillars, I know this is a roundabout way of answering this question, but taking a look at the big pillars, you obviously had the talent and the energy of the musicians, which, if you can harness that from an orchestra, is an unlimited source of power. It's hard to do in these settings because we haven't empowered musicians to often think about bringing their own creativity to the table every single day. You also have the power of the community, because if the community gets behind something, it goes viral in your own kind of circles, and that potential is unlimited, and so on. And so what we basically started doing is saying, we are going to put on concerts, many of which we're not even sure we can actually do right now, but we're going to make it work. We're going to give ourselves aspirational mantras, like trying to be the most interesting in the planet, and we're going to just green light ideas. We're not going to say that's not how orchestras do things, that's not what classical music is, whatever that might mean. And the results have been really striking in the community. There's been tremendous growth and tremendous conversation around the programs. I can give you just an example. The last 2 weeks, for instance, we had 2 weeks ago our neighborhood concerts, where we take the orchestra to lots of different neighborhoods. Some are wealthier, many are not. We've got about 14 venues now throughout the community that we visit. And that was an all Tchaikovsky program, relatively traditional. This simple little thing that we added in when we did the 1812 overture. We took our massive collection of bucket drums and everything else, distributed them to the audience, and had them play the canons. It's a little thing, but it creates a relationship and a dynamic of an experience that goes beyond expectation. Just this last week, we had a concert where we partnered with the Kentucky College of Art and Design. Every single piece of music had an artistic collaborator. So people had created films, lighting installations. There was an artist who had printed out 2,400 little cardboard pieces where you licked them, because she's a synesthetic. So the Mussorgsky Night on Bald Mountain was paired by a taste experience, a concept experience where people around the globe were playing pictures in an exhibition at the exact same time. Of 2 sound installations on top of the orchestral performances. That was what the artist dreamed up. It created a lot of conversations, and people were really intrigued by that concept. Every concert we do has some element of a story and a programmatic component way beyond simply playing a concert. And we've now created a standard where it's hard. We don't go back to a basic format of symphony on the second half and a few other pieces on the first half, because people now demand a creative response to every concert. And that has kind of led us to this idea of there should be no normal. Take that idea. There should be no normal week, whatever that is. Why would you do that? Why would you have just a normal week? Every week should be something extraordinary. And if you can't do something extraordinary, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it that week, or you need to rethink the whole system. So I know that's a really dramatic response to this question, and there have been a lot of other specifically articulated instances of how we've tried to do this. And we don't always succeed. A lot of it is aspirational. And like the Ali piece that I wrote, that was an aspirational work, but it certainly created conversations and relationships and connections that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
I think we should all get down to Louisville and hear a concert. That sounds fabulous.
Well, please come. You're very, very welcome. We love it when people come to visit the orchestra from the outside. I'll hook you all up with tickets. That's my other thing. I'm around town.
You heard it here first.
I'm serious. I live in the city. you have to live in the city. You want to be a music director, so you have to live in the city. And I go around, and when I talk to people, I give them tickets right then and there, invite them backstage, build a relationship. They'll remember that forever. And they will buy them one day.
That enthusiasm is so great, and you need that in a music director. It's interesting, you know, I guess one could say that programming for an orchestra is similar to curriculum for a conservatory or a school of music, and that's something that's heavily on my mind right now because we're now rethinking our curriculum. We're undergoing a program review, and you know, oftentimes when conservatories or schools of music are going through a program review, they think of additive ways that they can enhance the curriculum, but it gets so robust and so filled up, there's nothing else that you can add. You have to take things away. So what we're about to go through, this process, is to throw it all away and think and rebuild from the ground up in a similar way to what you're talking about with the programming. I think it's really crucial to think from the ground up like that. One of the big things that we've done at the conservatory recently as well, just to speaks to our diversity goals, is to partner with Silk Road Ensemble. So we had some of the Silk Road artists in collaboration with our orchestra in Symphony Hall last November for an amazing concert that had music from all around the globe. That was really a phenomenal experience for everybody, students especially. And now there's this Silk Road Creativity Lab that we just launched 2 weeks ago on Tuesday that has a whole bunch of those artists rotating through to work with our students. So it's we're trying to bring in different types of music, different classical traditions from around the world to enhance the diversity of programming and curricular opportunity that we have in the conservatory. And that leads me to Patrice, who has quite an experience, a wide experience in terms of performance. You're not, I mean, you alluded to this earlier, but you're not just a classical cellist. You do a lot of other types of styles, and I'd love to hear you speak to that a little bit more.
Sure. Well, yes, I am not labeling myself as a classical cellist. I am just a cellist who plays good music. That's my mantra.
Yes, but things like Alicia Keys
Absolutely.
and Stevie Wonder.
Good music. Hello. Just saying.
Absolutely.
So what happened with me is I went to Juilliard with a friend of mine, and she used to work with Sphinx. But we were in school together, and she had this crazy idea of wanting to build her own, at that time it was a quartet. It was an all-black female quartet that I was a part of with her. And then as that progressed, she was talking about, we need an LLC, and she was speaking all this foreign language, and I was like, I just want to play. I just want to play. That, learning the business side of the music industry led her to developing her own company in which she specifically hires string players in the media market. So that if that means collaborating with various well-known artists that we know of, Nicki Minaj, we got a chance to play behind her, J. Cole. She went on the road with Kanye West years ago, not the current Kanye West, years ago. Let's see, and she's just doing a remarkable job. The reason she was able to fill this hole is because most of those artists that I listen to, that other people listen to, when we see them visually on stage at the Grammys or when they're on the Today Show, for example, to promote their latest album, the string players in particular that they have are not a reflection of what the artist's cultural background is. I'm trying to be politically correct, so bear with me. So she's able to just say, hey, I have great musicians, call me up, I can hire them. It doesn't matter what they look like, but they can play, okay? So she has a plethora of now people who are knocking at her door wanting to be on the list, but that's how she started developing these relationships. But again, it goes back to the foundation of my teachers, just being the best artist that you can be. So that it doesn't matter what genre you're playing, because you're still at the top of your game. And I just choose to play stuff that I actually like and enjoy playing. The highlight of my non-classical career, I would have to say, was playing behind Stevie Wonder. I think I peed in my pants when I first met him. But he was such a sweetheart, and we had the honor of playing the end of his tour, the Songs of Tree of Life tour, and it culminated in New York at Madison Square Garden. I ain't never been to Madison Square Garden before. So the first time I got to play there was actually on stage with Stevie. It was crazy. But just being able to collaborate with wonderful artists and just making good music is a beautiful thing. So thank you.
Thank you. So we do have some questions from the audience in Slido. Thank you all very much. And a few of them have risen to the top. But I want to just go to one really quick that was for Teddy. Teddy, you mentioned green lighting of programmatic ideas, regardless of how they match traditional orchestra. How has this affected your musicians? So we've talked about the audience piece, but how has the orchestra responded?
My approach to kind of any form of leadership is that you have to create a sense that everybody owns whatever it is you're doing, especially in the orchestral medium, which is a challenging environment because it has that multi-part form. You have board, musicians, audience, staff, and then music director who's drawn to and pulled between all of those different sides. And so for me, as a leader in the community, everybody that is within those circles needs to feel like all of your ideas, or at least the mission or the underlying element that drives it, is something that they can believe in too, and they understand why, and they understand how, and they understand for what reason you are doing things. And it's really challenging because we've asked a lot of our musicians, but I have to say the group down there has been so incredibly understanding and willing to try things. And what's really special is the recognition when we try something and we were all uncomfortable with it, and I do believe that being uncomfortable is one of the hallmarks of creativity and making great art and doing things new. If you are comfortable, it's very hard to be creative. And when we're all uncomfortable together, but we know we're trying to do something that has a specific goal and it's successful, everybody shares equally in that success. It's not like I went and forged ahead and just tried to do it myself. We all need to share in that sense of having achieved something important, because that gives you the ability to get more buy-in the next time you have a crazy idea. And you have to keep having crazy ideas to perpetuate the system. And so I just give a huge shout out to our musicians down there. Louisville Orchestra has a very long history of being super creative. You may not know this, but back between the 1950s and the late 80s, they were the absolute #1. Nobody even came close to the orchestra in commissions and recordings. They commissioned nearly 200 pieces of music, recorded it. They were the first orchestra to have their own record label and recorded all of those works. It was a really dramatic, remarkable history for a town like Louisville. So it's in the DNA and the blood of the institution and the community. So we've just been kind of regenerating that and utilizing that to get the buy-in that we need. So I give a huge shout out to them down there.
It's crucial. In my first year as dean in Boston, that was one of the things that we did is to create a new vision statement. And it was this long-term iterative process that involved all in the community. And we achieved something that I think is a really great statement. But you can only succeed with that if you do have that collective buy-in from your constituents. So
yes.
Couldn't agree more, Teddy.
No.
Here's a tough question for everyone. And I'm going to just open this up for anyone who wants to jump in. What are some ways to nurture artistry if the immediate family is not supportive or in other cases doesn't have the resources?
I'll speak on this one. So when I was living in New York, for a small period of time, I was teaching, I was living in the Bronx with my family, my husband and kids, and a friend of mine that I went to school with was teaching at a KIPP program, and it just so happened to be like a 5-minute walk from where I lived. And he was like, I really want you to hear this kid of mine. I think he's special. I'm not a cellist, but I just want you to hear him. And I heard this student, and he was amazingly naturally gifted, to the point where I was in tears when I heard him. And he was only maybe 12 or 13 at that time. So I said, I asked the appropriate question: how long have you been playing the cello? Why do you want to play the cello? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself at school? And after getting to know him a little bit more, I realized that he came from a family, single-parent household. His brother was older and was about to go to college, and their housing situation, he was not allowed to practice at home, period. There was no discussion. His mother refused to let him practice at home. So what happened was, the reason he was in the KIP program is because the principal of the KIP program heard about this student and how gifted he was. And then I met the principal, and the principal came to me directly and said, if you want to teach him, I will pay for his lessons. So it has to start with the village. I'm a big person of explaining that it really does take a village to nurture all of our young students. I have children of my own, and I'm so blessed to have such a large village. But in this particular situation, there was the teacher who saw something, there was the principal who saw something, and the principal said, you know what, I'll just pay for it. A lot of times, especially in this day and age in our economy and stuff, it's really difficult to have the resources to afford such phenomenal teachers. You know, if you have like a teacher in a symphony and stuff, a lot of times their prices are naturally on the higher side. Or if you get a chance to meet somebody that teaches on a collegiate level, just to have the time to set aside and teach a younger child, or the money. So it takes time to figure out how we can develop our village around us. There's always people who are willing to help. You just got to sell it, especially when we're talking about young people. I'm sensitive to that. So it's all about nurturing that village and cultivating it.
Great.
If I may add to that.
Please, Maria.
I think what you've said is so important, Patrice, having a support system starting with people that believe in the student. And going back to the part of the question, what if their family or parents are not supportive? I truly believe in one of those systemic tenets, which is that you start educating the child, and then the child educates their family. So if you're persistent, if you have perseverance, nurturing a student, I am confident that education, that artistry is transferred to the family and that community that starts being part of that nurturing environment for the student over time.
Could I just ask, in El Sistema program, for instance, where things are more kind of standardized, there are systematic approaches to music education that are shared, does that change the dynamic at home? Because of course here, so many music programs in schools are relatively thin compared to what is available in El Sistema, and so then the parental involvement or the support becomes a much heavier kind of percentage of the expectations. So what do you think about?
I think that another wonderful thing of El Sistema is the sense of community and building a community and seeing other people that are like-minded, other people that are working hard towards the same goal, and just the level of dedication and time, and being in that community, there is a mentorship system. There's the older students or the students who are more experienced, the teachers, and you're learning from each other. And so each student really becomes their own teacher, their own mentor, because they see others mentoring others. So if the child has a good sense of autonomy, of ownership of their own growth, of what they need to do to get where they want to be part of that collective, I think they can kind of teach that to the parents. They can be more independent, and they will practice if they want to. They will go to orchestra. They will do these things, achieve these goals, work towards those goals if they see their musical community doing it. Yeah.
It's all about that village.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's turn to our audience here. We have a couple of people ready to go with some questions. Am I right? Uh-oh.
Jackson. My name is Kendall Gonzalez, and I'm a 12-year-old cellist, and I would like to attend Yale and be a part of Yale's cellos.
Okay.
If you can remember yourself at 12, what would be the best advice you wish someone had given you?
Wow. This put me on the spot. Okay. biggest advice that I would give my 12-year-old self is to stay true to yourself and believe yourself. It doesn't matter what the exterior is saying, unless they're encouraging your goals, right? I remember being 12 and in the 6th grade, and I went to a brand new school, and I didn't have a lot of friends. And then I had to play in like a school assembly, and then all of a sudden people was like, yo, I can't do that. That must be special, you know? So I started gaining friends that way, but I still kept my eye on what my goal was. As far as Yale cellos, that's a phenomenal thing. And I hope Mr. Paraso is looking down right now and smiling, because he would have loved to have had you. Unfortunately, he just passed away, for you guys that don't know. So try not to get emotional, since you brought that up. But Yale is a very phenomenal school, and I do want to speak to you separately on that. But it is definitely attainable. The School of Music is a beautiful school. The dean that I had is still there. It's a great community there. There's a great community at Boston Conservatory as well. And they also have a cello ensemble. And so does Berkeley. I'm ahead of the cello ensemble at Berkeley. You know, I have to plug that in. But yes, going back to the original question, just keeping the course, practicing, doing what you need to do, both musically and academically, is very, very important.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Can we turn to our left here?
Yes, my name is Brandon. I'm a pianist from Knoxville. So I have a question about nurturing seeds. I've got about 30 piano students, 7 of which are adults. And so out of all 30 of them, only 1 has a dream to go to Carnegie Hall, which is amazing. But I just have a question. How do you nurture those seeds when they have other interests? So I figure my challenge in teaching my students is, you know, a lot of them don't want to do music after high school. But I try and challenge them to tell them that, hey, you know, music is just as important. It can open many other doors for you. So how would you nurture those seeds who don't want to pursue music professionally, but still want to do it as maybe a hobby or a side gig? Or how would you nurture those seeds for like the older students? For like students who come back. I've got a student, my oldest student is 76. He still works and he practices all the time. But how do you keep those people encouraged and to stay in lessons?
Can I jump in on that? I think to Patrice's point about the village, I always refer to the community. I mentioned earlier a music festival that I run with my wife, which brings in participants who are exactly like you're describing. People who studied music young, didn't go into it in college, and came back to it perhaps as an adult. The experience that they have in the community that is Piano Sonoma and collaborating with artists in residence that we have there, it's that depth of artistic experience that it maintains the hook. It keeps them going and coming back year after year. And one of the things that I always try to do is to provide for those folks as many opportunities, low stakes opportunities for them to have performance opportunities as possible. Quite frankly, Piano Sonoma grew out of a big cohort of adult piano students that I had when I was in New York teaching at the evening division at Juilliard, where we would get together every 6 to 8 weeks and at one of their apartments in Manhattan, and we'd have salons, and we'd have wine, cheese, and music. And I would try out some new repertoire that I was working on. They would cut their teeth working hard to prepare for these performances, and I would occasionally bring in a young superstar for them to collaborate with. And that was sort of the seed that became my festival. And not that I'm trying to make a plug here for my festival, but that's the type of thing that I'm always thinking about when I'm addressing adult musicians. Now, for your high school students who are saying to you, I might want to do it as a hobby, but I want to go into something else, I always cite, I cite my wife as an example who has a double degree in biochemistry and piano from Oberlin. She's way smarter than I am. She went into the field of science at first, but she felt her calling and her love was in music, and so she turned a complete 180 and went back into music, thankfully for me. All she did was simply follow her heart. And I think that's what we need to be doing. And if somebody is following his or her heart into science or into law, that's okay. But I also think that the art form that we are practicing enriches our lives in ways that most other types of arts don't. And I think that you should encourage them to always have that as something that they keep in their back pocket. So, you know, whether it's having an occasional low-stakes performance, trying to continue with monthly piano lessons with somebody at their institution of higher education, I would encourage them.
Cool. Thank you all very much. Oh, yes.
I want to add to that too.
Yeah.
As an educator and a product of two educators, there's always the knowledge and the fact that every single person that you teach is not going to pursue that field, right?
Yeah.
However, at least I learned this from my parents, especially my dad being an orchestra director. I mean, when I was going to school, he had 2 orchestras, right? I mean, good 60-piece orchestra per orchestra. There's no way that every single year all of those seniors are going to major in music. But what my dad did was create such an impact that even if they did go on and pursue another or wanted to pursue another major, in the back of their mind, they're like, but does it have a good music program? Because I still want to play in the orchestra. I still want to. And what that creates is once they graduate, who knows, they might be sponsors for the local orchestra. They might be a part of another type of village to help sponsor another child who may not be as fortunate. But you're already planting that seed and fostering that love of music and artistry that can manifest in so many other different ways than just majoring in music and being an artist.
Cool. Thank you all. I have one more question, and then are you all just as intense with your students? Because I tell my students it's okay, you know, to not major in music, but it's just always going to be a part of their lives. Do you train those students who you know practice and are diligent, but you know they're not going to go on for furthering their education in music? Are you still as intense with them?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
I am too, but I just want to make sure that's the right thing to do.
Keep it up. Keep it up.
In particular, I teach at Berkeley, and being on the string faculty, it's very unique because I get students who, when you audition for Berkeley, whether you're going to be a major or not, you still have to audition on an instrument, right? So I have students who are just playing the cello to get through their requirements, to students who think they might want to tiptoe into a music career, to students who are really serious, all at the same time, including the other unique thing about Berkeley in the string department is any student can study with any one of us, and it doesn't have to be string specific or instrument specific. So I had a violinist, for example, last year who wanted to study with me. I'm like, I don't play violin. Why you want to be with me? What's going on? I'm scratching my head. But obviously, my boss said, well, obviously there's something there that they want to get from you, right? So because it's an easy thing to do to say, okay, well, you're not going to be a major, so you can just bypass the requirements, it's going to be fine. No, if they signed up for me,
Yeah, they're going to do it.
they know what the expectations are. I don't care if you're majoring in performance or not. There's certain expectations you have to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've developed that kind of, I guess, stereotype or whatever. They're like, oh, you signed up for Miss Jackson? Yeah, you're going to have to work. Just know you're going to have to practice.
Oh, yeah.
But that's what I've done. So now that I'm at Boston Conservatory, it's the same thing. There's no, oh, okay, well, no. There's still high expectations for anybody who's in my studio.
One quick thing to remember as a teacher is being demanding doesn't mean that you don't have to be fun in the lessons.
Oh, yeah.
And if you remember, I always remember whether my students are going to major or are going to pursue music professionally or not, you always want them to remember their lessons and their classes as being enjoyable, like they have joy for music and that they felt challenged in a positive way. So I think everyone, even if they're not going to pursue music professionally, they like to be challenged, but it always has to be a joyful and fun environment as much as we can make it.
Now,
Thank you all.
Thank you for those questions. And I hate to be that guy, but I have to be that guy. I'm having so much fun having a chat with all of you. Can you all join me in thanking Maria, Patrice, and Kendall for being here? Thank you. for the wonderful questions, everybody. Thanks to Sphinx for having us here. It's been an absolute pleasure. And let's continue having a great time at this conference.
Yes, sir.